Okay, so first, I really want to talk to you about partitions counts and replication factor. So we learned about this already, but as you understand, they're the most two important parameters when you create a topic, and they impact the performance and the durability of your system overall. So you really don't want to set them the wrong way. And I'm going to give you guidelines, okay? This is not just the plain truth. Those are guidelines to make you think and realize how one should set these parameters when creating a topic. So here is our topic. It has two partitions and a replication factor of 2. We recognize this because there's a replication and we can see that each partition has a leader. Now it is best to get the parents first time. Maybe we actually needed to have 3 partitions. Well, if we need to have 3 partitions and the partition counts increases after we set it to 2 and the topic has undergone its life cycle, then we will break our keys ordering guarantee. So this is something you have to be really careful about the first time. Also, if the replication factor increases during the topic lifecycle, so we started with a replication factor of 2 right now, but then you increase it to 3, well, you're going to put more pressure on your cluster. And this can lead to instability or performance decrease because all of a sudden your brokers have to do more work. So it is super important to get these the first time right. Now you just don't guess and get it right. You guess and test it. But these are pointers to how you should guess. So first, partitions count. Each partition can handle a throughput of a few megabytes per second. It can give you 1 megabyte per second, it can be 10 megabytes per second. It really depends on how your Kafka cluster is set up, on the quality of your network, on the proximity of your clients. So the guideline is measure it for your setup. You need to know how much a partition can handle in your setup. Now, if you have more partitions, that implies a few things. You get better parallelism, better throughput. Well, that's easy, right? The more partitions you have, the more throughput you have. And you have the ability to also run more consumers in a group to scale. As we've seen in the theory, if we have 3 partitions, we are limited to 3 consumers in a group, and we cannot scale further than that. A 4th consumer will just be inactive. Now, say our 3 consumers are swamped and they can't get with the load, well, we can't just launch a 4th one and help it out. So if you expect high throughputs, you kind of want to have a lot of partitions so you can have more consumers in a group. Also, the more partitions you have, the more brokers you will utilize. So if you have a large cluster of 20 brokers and you create a topic with 2 partitions, well, you only have 2 brokers working for you. The other ones will just sit there idle. So you really want to have partitions at least on each broker so that each broker is utilized and can help you out. But the more partitions you have, you're going to have more elections that ZooKeeper will perform for you, and you have more files open in Kafka. So overall, the Kafka project has evolved a lot so that your Kafka cluster can have more partitions. ZooKeeper has to do less or do it more efficiently. So overall, I would say the general trend is that Kafka is starting to have more and more and more partitions handled in the system. But still, the guidelines I'm giving you are rough guidelines. So here we are. Partitions per topic is the $1 million question. And there's not one answer as you guess, but I'll give you some guidelines. Number 1 is if you have a small cluster, and I judge to be a small cluster to be less than 6 brokers, I usually say create it 2 times the number of brokers you have. And that's just intuition. The reasoning behind it is that if my clients have more brokers over time, maybe they double their size of their cluster to 12 brokers, well, at least there will be enough partitions to cover that. So when you start with a small cluster, I would say do at least 2 times the number of brokers, and 12 overall is a number I really like. Now, if you have a big cluster over 12 brokers, I would say it's not necessary to go 2 times the number of brokers, but you can still follow that guideline. You definitely can. Otherwise, just create 1 times the number of broker, and that's all right as well. Again, intuition, nothing else. What if you're medium between 6 and 12 brokers? Well, you just figure it out. Maybe you want 2 times the number of brokers, maybe you want 1 time. I like the 2 times the number of brokers. It's up to you. It's just intuition, okay? Now, the idea is that you also want to take into account the number of consumers you need to run in parallel in a group at peak throughput. So if your consumers are going to be very busy, very CPU intense, and you need 20 consumers at peak time, well, you definitely want at least 20 partitions in your topic, okay? Regardless of how big or how small your cluster. So it's very important to have that and know this. You also need to adjust for the producer throughputs. So if you have like a super high throughput, or you know it's going to increase by crazy for the next 2 years, regardless if you have a small or big cluster, I would say do it 3 times the number of brokers so you can plan and adjust in the future. Overall, it's something you want to get right for the next 2 years. So don't be shy at taking a high number, but not too high, okay? Overall, I would say test. Every Kafka cluster will have a different performance, and this is why it's such an elusive answer, but I'm trying to give you a thought process around this, okay? Basically, don't be the extreme. Don't create a topic with 1,000 partitions. That's useless unless you have a very, 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 very good reason to do this. I think it's useless otherwise. Or if you have a big cluster with 20 brokers and you create a partitions count of 2, that's also the other extreme, and I think that's a waste of capacity from Kafka. Okay, so it just gives you an idea. At least 1 times the number of brokers, at most 2 times or 3 times the number of brokers, and you get an idea. Now, replication factor should be at least 2, usually 3, maximum 4. So the higher the replication factor, you know this already, we're going to get better resilience of your system. So n-1 brokers can fail. We're going to get more replication. That means there will be a higher latency, especially if you do x equals all. And there's going to be more disk space on your system used. For example, if you go from 2 to 3 as a replication factor, that's 50% more data being stored on your cluster. So overall, I think it's fine. My guideline is to start at 3 to get started, and you need to at least have 3 brokers for that, but I don't recommend any Kafka cluster to have less than 3 brokers. So set your replication factor to 3 to get started and move on. If replication factor gets an issue, like, the performance degrades, I would say get a better broker. Never compromise your replication factor. Always get better machines if performance gets an issue. And never, ever, ever set it to 1 in production. That's a no-go. I've seen some clusters in production from big companies running with replication factor of 1, not even knowing it. And to me, it's a no-go. If a broker goes down, your partition is offline and you're done. So be very important. Now, just guidelines. It's commonly accepted, I don't really have a source for this, but that a broker should not hold more than 2,000 to 4,000 partitions. Okay? So per broker, 2,000 to 4,000 partitions. And additionally, for an entire Kafka cluster, you should have a maximum of 20,000 partitions, okay, across all brokers. The reason is that when intuitively, right, when the brokers go down, ZooKeeper needs to perform a lot of leader election for each partition, and that's intense, and that puts a lot of strain on the system, and that impacts the time to recovery. So just give you an idea. Now, if you need more partitions than 20,000 in your system, well, you're way past the beginner's course anyway, but you add brokers to your system. And if you need more than 20,000, then it will take time to get there. You follow what I call the Netflix model, and you create more Kafka clusters. And I think Netflix operates something like 20 Kafka clusters or more. So they definitely know that there's a limit to how many partitions you can have. Overall, please don't create a topic with 1,000 partitions, as I said, to achieve a high throughput. Start at a reasonable number and test the performance. Okay? So I hope that was helpful. I know it's not a definitive answer, but you won't find one on the web. But those are my recommendations and guidelines. Hope that helps, and I will see you in the next lecture.